As driven, ambitious Christian entrepreneurs, how do we grow our business in a way that honours Christ? From seeking Him first in all of our business dealings, being surrendered to His will, and knowing exactly where and how we can make an impact through our business for the furtherance of His kingdom. Welcome to the Christian Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross, and these are just some of the topics my guest and I will be discussing in the hope that we may inspire and empower you to walk strongly in your faith so you can build a thriving business that honours Him in every way. Let's dive in. And welcome to another episode. So my guest today says near failure is a much better teacher than actual failure. And joining me on today's show is Peter de Silva. Now, after a 35 plus year career as a senior executive in financial services, Peter was severed after the merger of TD Ameritrade and Charles Schwab. Now, subsequently, he has written a book titled Taking Stock. And in the book, he imparts his 10 life and leadership lessons from his seat at the table. And we're going to dive into those a little bit further in today's episode. Now, one unique feature that he uses is the letter of Paul to Corinthians. And he uses that as a backdrop for a discussion of leadership. And Peter concludes that the finest definition of leadership can be found in that biblical passage if you change the words love to leadership. So on today's show, Peter's going to share 10 life and leadership lessons and how to apply these in both your personal and your professional life. We're going to talk a little bit about his own journey to accept a chronic disease that he has and become more open and vulnerable about it. And it's even led to a campaign to find treatments and cures for Charcot-Marie tooth disease. And he's also going to touch on why the 2008 financial crisis was as much a leadership failure as it was a failure of the financial system. So lots to talk about in today's episode. Peter, welcome.
Anne-Marie, it's great to be with you this evening. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. One of the things that my guests and I often will discuss are the lessons that we have learned through our life's journey. And being that this is the Christian Entrepreneur Show, we really can tap into the challenges and trials and tribulations, if you will, using that term, that the Lord has really led us through, being able to shape our character, and through that, then be able to share those lessons to others who may be going through a similar experience. So so glad that you're able to come on the show and share. We're going to dive into 10 of the life and leadership lessons, and of course weave in some of those other key things, which is very much part of your life's journey as well. So we've got a lot to cover in today's show, as I mentioned. So 10 life and leadership lesson. What would be the first one, Peter, that you would want to share with us today?
Well, Anne-Marie, maybe just a bit of backdrop in terms of how these were created. And I would say this, I spent 35 years plus, as you said, in the financial industry in various leadership capacities. And the creation of these life and leadership lessons were not a single moment. They were not a single event. It was a process, literally. And so over the last 30, 35 years, these things sort of came to me and they were rattling around in my brain. And one day I started to codify them and write them down and said, there's actually something of substance here. There's some substance from my experiences and from being a leadership practitioner all those years. There was really something I thought others could benefit from. But they're really through the lens of someone who's been on the front lines of leadership for the last 30, 35 years, someone who's been a practitioner of leadership, not necessarily an academic. So these 10 principles, I think, are incredibly useful and usable in their real world in the way that they've been created. So they're all sort of through my business lens. But one day I was thinking, well, these are applicable in life too. These aren't just about how to run an ethical company or a company with high moral standards. These are really about life as well. And so let me start with one, and then we can kind of go anywhere we want. One of the primary roles of a leader is to create and communicate a compelling vision and purpose for an organization, any organization. Oh, by the way, I would challenge people to think about what's the purpose of your family? What's the purpose of your community? So again, these are not just applicable in a business context. And one of my favorite sayings is this: it's that vision without action is merely a dream, and that action with vision is just wasting time. But vision with action can change the world. And
Mhm.
so, what we are trying to do with this particular principle is really impress upon everyone that you have to have a strong, compelling vision. You have to know where you're going, and then you have to enroll others in that. It's not just good enough to talk about it, you have to enroll people in it and get them excited about following you.
Yeah, so true. I would love to hear your definition, if you will, of the word leadership. And the reason I ask that is so often people say, "Oh, well, I'm not really a leader." I'd love your opinion on that, because when I think about leadership, it is about the influence, and exactly what you said. You know, you have a vision, and then you take action, and by inspiring others to go in that direction, and we would hope that your vision is one that, as you said, is integral and so forth, that you can
Mhm.
inspire others. So how would you define leadership?
I define leadership principally in the context of behaviors and attributes that I think leaders exhibit. So I think they exhibit humility as an example. I think they exhibit vulnerability, which, by the way, I didn't do for many, 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 many years. But I finally came around to realize that being a bit vulnerable can actually be a very powerful way to lead others. So I think about it in the context of behaviors. And later, I hope we get a minute or two to talk about the afterword of our book, of my book, which really talks about the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians and how I think that is the finest leadership definition I've ever heard.
Yeah. You know what's interesting too? I mean, when we look at the life of the Lord, of Jesus, I mean, he was just an incredible leader, humble, who he was, and is and will be forever. To think,
Hmm.
how he related to us and so forth can be a really great role model as well. So, okay, so you talked a little bit about the one of the first leadership lessons that you've learned, and I love the way that you've confirmed that it's not only in business, but in life in and of itself.
Yeah.
So we can use these principles that you're going to share. What would be another one that you would like to talk about today?
Oh, let's talk about one that sort of plays off the first one in the sense that, once you have that vision and that purpose clearly understood and articulated, and you have people enrolled, the next thing really need to do is to properly align strategy, structure, and people. So this is a how, right? This isn't the what. This is the how you're actually going to execute against that plan. And again, not too different than in life as in leadership. And so once you have that, the question then becomes, how do I organize against this set of objectives that I have? And then do I have the right people on the bus, motivated and led the right way, compensated the right way, rewarded the right way, such that they're committed to the cause at hand? So I think what's really important, and this is where I see mistakes being made, particularly with young leaders. And I was a young leader once, and I'll tell you just a very brief story. One day I was talking to my boss, and I had this beautiful organizational plan put together, and I brought it to him. And he looked at it and he said, "This is really, really interesting." He said, "But what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish?" Because he said, "There's no way to know if this is the right plan and the right people if you're not perfectly clear about what it is you aspire to do." And so it really struck me. And now I talk about this in a sequential way, that you have to have the strategy. Great, got it. Then you have to have the structure. And only then can you determine whether you have the right people with the right skills and competencies to help execute.
Mhm. I love that. Isn't it wonderful that, there are others who, through their feedback, can really help, shape us and how we move forward. Something else that I think is really important too, and if you think about having a vision, unless, of course, you've got that vision and that purpose, all of the other things, if you don't have that, as you said, the structure and the strategy can also end up nowhere. So I would imagine that if someone is not clear on that vision first, that is something that they want to become really clear. What is the purpose for this? Is that correct?
You're spot on. Organizations wander in the wilderness, not exactly clear about who the client is or
Peter, I'm just going to
thing
jump in there. I
more.
might get you to remove your earplugs because there's a little bit of a tapping going. Oh, you're still on mute. We have to just change the settings for the audio.
Is that a little better?
Much better.
Yeah, yeah. So I forgot the question. Honestly, you were just asking me.
Oh, talking about the vision, being so clear on that first.
Yeah, and without that clarity, you basically are wandering in the wilderness. And I've seen so many companies that don't know crystal clear who is our client, what is our market, what are we trying to achieve. And so, take someone like Elon Musk. You may like him or not, and that's not what I'm here to say, but he's crystal clear about the markets that he's trying to serve, the clients that he wants to serve, the product that he's going to deliver to them, whether it's Starlink or it's Tesla. I mean, he's very, very clear about that. And as a consequence, he's able to enroll others in his vision and help him execute against that plan.
I love that. What's really interesting too, as you're talking about getting clear on that vision and mission, would you say to people who are struggling with that, what are some of the things that you've done that have enabled you to get clear on what is that vision that we want to really hold as almost the north, that this is where we're going to head as a business, and even as in a personal life? What are some of the things that you've done, Peter, to help get clarity on that?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to talk to your clients and your prospects. It's I know it seems bizarre and weird, but you'd be shocked how many companies don't spend enough time with their clients, really trying to understand their needs, really trying to understand how we can bring value into their lives. And that is the first place to start, right? You have to understand the marketplace. Then you have to understand your, prospects, if you will. You have to clearly understand the needs that they have, and then you build products. So many people start out with the product first without really understanding the need that's out there. And a good example is I see Shark Tank all the time. I love watching Shark Tank, right? And this will happen once in a while that Kevin O'Leary might say to one of the presenters, "Oh, this is interesting. This isn't a product. This isn't a business. This is a hobby." I mean, because you haven't clearly articulated exactly what purpose this product or this service presents.
Mm.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. Okay, so we talked about vision and action, we talked about strategy, and we talked about structure. What's another lesson we can learn today?
All good things in life start and end with people, period, end stop. And that's a fact. Even in this digitally focused world that we have today, the Zoom world that we have today, people really, really make the difference. And so I have a saying that, in essence, if you take care of the associates, they'll take care of the clients, and the rest will take care of itself. And I've spent a lot of time not only thinking about this, but exercising this in my professional career. And every time it works beautifully. And I'll never forget when I was at a company called UMB Financial Corporation here in the United States. One day I was talking to HR and I said, we've got a wonderful culture. We've got a wonderful business. We have great clients. We actually, I think, do a wonderful job. But I'm trying to prove my thesis that, if you take care of associates, they'll take care of clients and the rest will take care of it. So how can I prove that thesis? And so, in fact, what we did is we went and got 3 points of data and put them on a chart. And those 3 data points were associate satisfaction. Every year we did an associate engagement survey. Client satisfaction. Every year we did a client satisfaction survey. And then, of course, our earnings. And so we put these on a chart over about a 7 to 10 year time frame. And guess what? There was a very positive, tight correlation where if you took care of associates and you got high scores there, you got super high client scores, and then your results got better and better and better. So for
Wow.
me, that's one of the most basic things for leaders to understand, that all good things come from people and through people, and you have to take care of associates, and the rest gets a lot easier.
Yes. I'd love to spend a little bit of time just briefly touching on a word that you mentioned that was very much part of, I would imagine, you spoke about the word culture. I'd love for you to define what you believe culture means, and what are some key things that an organization, a business, whether they're small or large or larger, what can we do to, or what do we need to have in place to be able to develop a strong culture?
So culture is, in essence, the thing that binds us. It's the thing that binds people together in common cause, right?
Mhm.
That's really what culture is. And people talk about good cultures, they talk about bad cultures, but at the end of the day, fundamentally, a culture is an expression of what you believe and how you function and how you act. And this
Mhm.
isn't about culture on a coffee cup. This is about culture in the essence of how you actually function as a person and as an organization. So for me, that's the essence of culture. It allows us to work in common cause, and it
Yes.
allows us to work in a way that we all understand and we all agree how that's going to manifest itself in our personal relationships and our relationships with our clients, with our communities, and all the other stakeholders that we inevitably have.
Yeah. And so what happens then? Have you seen what happens, Peter, in an organization that maybe is not clear on what constitutes their culture? As you said, that common cause, common beliefs you talked about as well. What happens when an organization starts to hire people that maybe doesn't have that common cause, common beliefs? Does that erode culture, and does that impact the results for clients, obviously, and bottom line results?
It absolutely does. I mean, I've seen this happen in numerous occasions where, different cultures, just talk about an acquisition. Acquisitions are difficult just by design. You're bringing two very large organizations together. I've done a bunch of them. Okay. But the hardest thing is to blend the cultures. And I remember when we sold a company named Scottrade to TD Ameritrade, and they were both pretty good sized companies. And the CEO of Ameritrade did something that I thought was absolutely right. He said the surviving culture is neither the TD Ameritrade culture or the Scottrade culture. It'll be a new culture that we will create together. We will take the best of this culture and the best of that culture, blend it together, get buy-in, new buy-in from all the stakeholders, and that'll be our culture. And I thought that was really brilliant on his part. We did that, and quite honestly, it was one of the most successful integrations I'd certainly ever seen in quite some time.
Fantastic. I mean, obviously, when we're talking about culture, particularly for businesses who are founded and run by Christian entrepreneurs, there's also something that we need to be mindful of, and that is, of course, biblical principles. How do we run our businesses in a way that honors and glorifies the Lord? There's certain rules that the Lord has put into place in order that we can really align with His Word and so forth. So, what are some of the key aspects? And I'm sure there's so many that you've been able to draw from the lessons that you've learned, that has to be so important from a Christian entrepreneur's point of view, that these need to be part of your culture when we think about the word as well. Can you give us some insights on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of people that I admire for sure, historic figures, etc. But one of the men I really admire is Shimon Peres, the former Israeli prime minister. One of the things he said really has stuck with me. He said, "Always be optimistic, but never be satisfied." And he was a peacemaker. He worked his whole life to try to create peace in that part of the world, that very dangerous part of the world. And I remember him saying this: always be optimistic, but never be satisfied. And that's how I've tried to operate too, right? Be positive, be optimistic, be forward looking, be supportive, but never be satisfied, because
Mm,
success is a journey, not a destination. It is a never ending journey for all of us to find success. Oh, and by the way, success means different things to different people. Not everybody wants to achieve, be a CEO of a company. Some want to give back to their communities, and they find success and happiness and fulfillment in that. Others want to, be a welder. They find success and fulfillment in that. So this isn't about what you do; it's about how you do it, and
mm.
that's the most important thing. I think it's the traits and the attributes at which you go about your work is far more important than the work itself.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so we talked as number three is people. What would be another lesson, Peter?
We'll pick on number four, and that one is focus and finish. I think One of the things I like to say is that, a great strategy poorly executed is doomed to failure, while a good strategy, flawlessly executed, will win every time. And that really gets to focus and gets to finishing things. And I see so many individuals and organizations that, in essence, don't exactly know what they're trying to accomplish. Back to the strategy question, back to the purpose question. And so every initiative looks like a good one. I remember when I went to UMB Financial Corporation, in the first few months, you're getting yourself acclimated and you're looking at the work plans. And I remember saying to the team a few months in, I'm like, these are all interesting initiatives, but what do they add up to? I don't see how it all ladders up to something more meaningful, to something more important. And so we retooled everything and we aligned everything. But what's really important is figuring out, this is going to sound trite, but what's really important is figuring out what's important and then focusing on those things, getting those things done, and then moving on to the next.
I love that. All right, so we're talking about 4, focus and finish. What's number 5?
Well, I'll do them a little out of order because I went out of order a little earlier, and it doesn't matter. The order is not important at all. But how about this one? I talked a few minutes ago about this idea that all good things in life start and end with people, and that's a code for relationships. So one of my principles is that we need to build enduring, mutually beneficial relationships, and that we should be doing that every single day, no matter what is going on in your life. Building those relationships are extraordinarily important. As I said earlier, even in this digital world today, it's absolutely essential that we build these relationships. And I think relationships can be characterized a couple of different ways. One way I think about them is relationship can be transactional, or it can be more long-term and mutually beneficial. We have transactional relationships all the time, which basically mean you do something for me, I do something for you, and that's okay. It might be for a defined period of time or for a defined task that needs to be done. No problem. That's okay. But the real valuable relationships are those that have enduring value to them. And I like to think about relationships in the context of what I loosely define as relationship equilibrium. And what does that mean? What relationship equilibrium means, yes, it does mean I give as much as I get, but it also means that over a long period of time, that the two individuals feel like, you know what, there's really good things that come from this relationship. And as you know, every relationship of any enduring value is based upon one characteristic exclusively, and that's trust. And without trust, it just doesn't work. And you ask yourself, why there's so many divorces in the world? Well, in part because individuals don't achieve this, what I call relationship equilibrium, right? This idea that I give as much as I get. If you're giving 80%, but you're only getting 20% back, eventually that gets tiring. And sometimes you get divorced, as an example. What happens when an employee feels like, boy, I'm putting in all this effort and I'm not getting recognized and I'm not getting rewarded and I don't feel fulfilled and I don't feel like this is what I want to be doing? They leave the company. So this whole idea of finding equilibrium in your life, in your relationships, I think is central.
Yeah. What's interesting about that too is if I think back to some of the conversations that I've had, is something that very much aligns to what you said earlier when we started the call. And that is, what are you working towards? And if we think about that as from a relationship point of view, it's being able to express to your spouse or even, relationship within the workplace, your employees. But let's talk about spouses here. What is it that you want? What is it that you need from them? Is to be clear on that and then being able to communicate that. Because if we think about one of the other topics that I spoke about on the show is the different love languages, how we express love and how we receive love can be very different. And it's to be aware of that because the, what's the opposite of the equilibrium? What would be the word that the equilibrium?
Yeah, sort of relationship equilibrium is what I call it. Yeah.
Yes, but so the opposite of that may be because the way that we're expressing it is not
It would be
being
disequilibrium,
isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
but if you have this equilibrium, you're going to have conflict, and eventually you're going to have things break apart.
yeah, fantastic. Love that. So important. And it's to continuously keep in check to make sure that the other person is feeling loved and valued and so forth, which is so important. All right, what would be the number 6 that you want to share today?
How about this one? I've learned over time that leading by principles is a far better way, a far more enlightened way to lead individuals than with a set of strict rules.
Mm.
And if you just kind of contrast the Code of Hammurabi, which was 282 very discrete rules, and it was basically, if you do this, this will be the outcome. If you kill, you will be stoned, stoned to death, as an example. It was a very much a here's the issue and here's the outcome. Contrast that, for example, with the U.S. Declaration of Independence, right, which has been copied the world over, which was a principle document. It was very principled versus this strict rule-based continuum. And I just find that so much better to lead with a set of principles. One of the first thing I do when I take on a new team is we go away for a couple hours or whatever it takes, and we actually write down how are we going to function as a team. What are the things we are going to do with, for, and to each other, so that we are clear about how that's going to function. And I find that very, very, very powerful. People really love that because then there's no surprises, right?
Mhm.
And if you allow people to work within those principles, you get two wonderful results generally. You get innovation and you get creativity. If it's too rules based, you can actually stifle innovation and creativity quite easily. And so
Mm.
I find that most people and most enlightened leaders today really try to set the guardrails in a very principled way. And then, of course, you have to monitor it. Of course, sometimes people go outside those guardrails. And by the way, one of the things I always tell my teams is it's okay to call a foul on me or on any of your teammates as long as you do it respectfully.
Mm. So true. Love that. Principles rather than rules. Is there a good set of number of principles without being overwhelming in your experience?
Yeah, it's a great question because you don't want 50 principles and all of a sudden you just wrote a bunch of rules. And so I would say it's enough so that everyone has an understanding of how they're going to function and what the expectations are for performance with each other,
Mm.
but not so much that you've actually begun to think about this as more, I'll call them principal rules, which you want to avoid. So there's not a magic number, but I would say just enough so you feel like you've covered the waterfront.
Yeah, fantastic. Great insight there. What would be number 7
Well,
lesson?
let's see. We can talk about collaboration, and you might say, "Well, that's obvious." I mean, it takes lots of people to get great things done for sure. But there's a difference, for example, between teamwork and true collaboration. Teamwork, we come together, we have an opportunity to solve a problem, we have an opportunity to build something, whatever it might be. But that's different than collaboration, because collaboration, in my mind, requires humility. It requires everyone to say, you know what, I don't have all the answers, but together we're smarter, we're stronger, we're better, and we can find the answers. Again, some talk about teamwork. I think collaboration is a much higher order of working together. It requires also a very important dimension. It requires the willingness to self-sacrifice for the good of the whole. Right? Accomplishing great things, as I like to say, can only happen in the context of one dream and one team. Right? So one dream, one team. I talk about that all the time with my teams. I'm like, we can't allow voices to of dissent to really penetrate here. We are one team. We have one dream that we're working towards. We're willing to self-sacrifice for the good of the whole. And I find if you have those sorts of feelings amongst teams that collaborate, you can do great things.
Mm. Yeah, love that. What would be the next lesson?
I'm sorry, say again.
I was gonna say we're just about out of time, but I do wanna cover all of the 10. So what would be the next lesson?
How about operating with a sense of urgency? Things move very quickly today, for sure, in this tech-enabled world that we all live in. But I do think it's important, right? It's important to operate with a sense of urgency. And here's how I think about it. If you think about history and data and analysis and reason, they're the essential ingredients when making decisions. You have to have that. You have to have good facts in order to make good decisions, obviously. But also time and intuition play into this as well, right? We've heard, and seen many folks who just want to analyze and analyze again and analyze a little bit more. Well, the world is passing by. The opportunity is passing by, even as you're doing that analysis. So I think there's an opportunity for leaders to, yes, certainly collect all the facts and data that they can, but then make a decision and make sure that on top of those facts and data that you also have your intuition, if you will, and time. Because again, as time goes by, the opportunities may be going by as well. So use your common sense, but add your intuition and your empirical analysis and make the good decisions. And here's the important thing. We all know this, but it's hard to do. If you're wrong, course correct quickly.
Yes.
Course correct quickly. And remember this. People won't remember where you started out, that you were on the wrong course, but they'll remember where you ended up.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that tip. And I had to smile when you were talking about collecting information. And there's going to be people on the team that they love to do that. But I also love that you've shared when you put kind of a deadline on a particular decision, this is when we're going to make that decision. So let's use that time, whatever it might be, to gather all of the right information that we need so that we can come collectively and collaboratively to the right decision for our team. Great way to set that up. What would be we've got 2 lessons, if I'm correct, to cover. What would be the second to last one, Peter?
We do. Well, how about this one, that in order to be successful, you have to engage, you have to develop, and you have to retain superior, diverse talent. Organizations today need to look like the clients that they serve and the constituents that they serve. So this idea of diversity is extraordinarily important, right? And I went through this in some of my experiences where we didn't have talent that understood the life experiences or the lived experiences of some of our clients, and that made it difficult to relate. And so we really made a conscious effort to try to recruit folks who could really understand and effectively face off, if you will, with our clients. So engaging, developing, and retaining are the 3 most important issues here as it relates to talent. And engagement is all about creating an environment, creating that culture that we were talking about earlier, creating an environment that people want to be part of, that they are excited to be part of. Development of talent is one of the most important jobs of a leader. I like to say that, sometimes you don't know how effective a leader is until they've been gone for a period of time, because what they leave behind, the real legacy they leave behind, are the people that they leave behind.
Mm.
And I think about Howard Schultz, who has been the CEO of Starbucks 3 times. 3 times he's had to come back. And I really wonder out loud whether that makes him a great leader or not. Now, he's been a terrific innovator, and he's done some wonderful things with Starbucks, obviously. But on the other hand, I have to sit back and say, if he had to come back in 3 times, he didn't leave the organization in a really good place. And that to me is an illustration of not developing talent around him. And then retaining that talent. It's not just enough to engage them and develop them. You want to retain them, one, for continuity purposes, leadership continuity, client continuity, etc., but also because it's very costly. If you can't retain talent, you're constantly spinning, you're constantly challenging the culture, you're constantly, spending dollars to recruit and to train and such. And so I think the 3 pieces of engage, developing, retaining superior, diverse talent are incredibly important for successful organizations.
Yes. Each of these lessons that you shared today with us, Peter, I think we could have had a show and then some on each of these. So for those people who are listening in and thinking, oh, I wish we could have dived deeper into either of these, maybe another show. All right. Number 10, what would that one be, Peter?
So the last one is what I call taking intelligent risks on emerging leaders, back to this point of development and the importance of development and the responsibility you have as a leader to develop others. Great leaders really understand this. They understand they have an obligation to build the next generation of talent. They provide emerging and experienced leaders with opportunities to learn and to grow and to stretch. And I'll tell you just a very quick story from my own personal life. This is where I picked this principle up. I was a very young executive at Fidelity Investments in Boston. One day my boss came in and said, "Hey, Peter, we got a great opportunity for you to go run part of our operation in Covington, Kentucky. And I'm like, Fred, I don't even know where Covington, Kentucky is, I mean, let alone go there. He's like, no, you need to do this. Long story short, I ended up moving to Kentucky for 2 years to help them write an organization that had some difficulty. And a weird thing started to happen, Anne-Marie, where kind of every week Fred would come down to Covington from Boston, to Kentucky from Boston. He would put his feet up on the desk, read the newspaper, call a few people, and then get back on a plane and go home. And I was always curious. I'm like, what was that all about? I mean, it's great that he was there. Fred and I were great friends. We got along terrifically well, but he wasn't really there doing very much. And I just let it go. No big deal. So eventually I moved back to Boston. And one night I'm at a cocktail party with Fred's boss, Mark. And Mark says to me, geez, Pete, great job down there. We're so proud of what you did. Just a wonderful, wonderful deal. And he said, and to think, quote, some of us in the executive committee didn't think you were up for it. Mm. And so, of course, I kind of stopped, looked at him, and didn't know what he was saying. So the next morning, I walked into Fred's office, closed the door, and said, Fred, level with me. What was going on during that period of time? I'm confused. And he looked at the floor and he said, don't worry about it. It's all good, right? I said, yeah. He said, it all worked out great. You did a great job, etc. I said, yeah, I guess so. But what I learned, and I kind of stopped Fred at one point, I said, now I get it. Now I get it. You came down there every week, not because you thought I needed help, but because you were trying to give confidence to the executive team that this young guy, if there was anything going off the rails, you'd be able to help get it back on the rails. And so I took from that this idea that, one, you have an obligation to build young and emerging talent for sure, but also this idea of building fences, that part of a role of a leader is to identify talent for sure and stretch that talent, but build a fence around them so they don't fail. And this gets to the point you made earlier in the show, that I believe sometimes near failure is a much stronger teacher than actual failure. Because what I have tried to do in my life, based upon what Fred did with me, was basically, stretch people, grow people, etc., and let them get up to the fence. Let them get right up to it with the decisions and such. Give them the empowerment to get right up to it. But sometimes I feel like, they might be heading off kilter a little bit, and I pull them back. I pull them back. We sit down and I ask a dozen questions. Why is this the right path? Why are you doing this, etc.? And what I find more often than not is sometimes they'll change their perspective. But it's our obligation as leaders to make sure that we are stretching and growing talent and building fences around them, because failure in an entrepreneurial context might be okay. And quite candidly, I know a lot of entrepreneurs that have failed and picked themselves back up and gotten funded again and been very successful. Honestly, in a corporate context, that's not always the case.
Yeah, great insight there, Peter. Thank you for sharing. So all of those 10, and if people are only just catching the last few, really go back and have a listen to all 10 of what Peter has been sharing. But if we wrap up, and then considering one of the things that you said at the beginning of the show, why you were saying that the 2008 financial crisis was as much of a leadership failure as it was a failure of the financial system. Thinking about those 10 different lessons that you've just shared, Peter, are there one or a couple of those, or would you say a reflection of all of those if you look back at what was happening, not just at the time, but what was leading up to the 2008 financial crisis? We can often learn in hindsight. What would be some hindsight lessons that we can learn, maybe picking from some of those 10 lessons that could have impacted what 2008 may have become? Any insight?
Yeah, for sure. So I spent quite a bit of time thinking about this, and there's a whole section in the book that sort of addresses the 2008 crisis. And my own view on it was there were a bunch of forces going on simultaneously. Number one, you're right, it predates 2008. Congress in the United States had passed a goal to, in fact, increase home ownership in America as the best way to create wealth for individuals. And it was all based on a faulty belief that the price of homes goes up forever. They never go down. Yeah, they move around, but net, they're always moving up. And that was a belief that they had. So it was a great wealth accumulator or wealth creator for Americans. Well, with that goal, then it really unleashed the creative juices, I guess you could call it, of a lot of the mortgage companies, banks, et cetera, who say, well, if Congress wants us to increase home ownership, there's a natural equilibrium around that, somewhere around 60, 62, 63%. But if they want to get to 65, 66, we're going to have to do some things different. We're going to have to create new types of loans. We're going to have to create synthetic securities so we can send these loans all around the world as bonds, in essence. And so they began to create these brand new products. And I'll tell you, I was watching this happen from the sidelines, and I knew this was going to end badly. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew it had to end badly when, and I love this, when they were creating these loan products, they had names for them. And so there would be low documentation loans, which basically meant just the bare minimum information, sometimes not even really financial information to give
Yeah.
a loan. Then there was another category called no documentation loans. Basically,
Yeah.
call up, give your name and address. Here's the address of the property, and they give you a loan based upon what they believe the value of that property to be. Again, on the belief that the property would always go up, and so they could always sell the property and repay the loan if they absolutely had to. Those loans, you know what they were called? They were actually called liar's loans, and the
Wow.
industry actually coined that phrase. So what really was troubling me was this idea that, okay, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Just because you can make these types of loans and they are, quote, legal, doesn't mean you should. You shouldn't put people into debt beyond what they can service reasonably, right? You shouldn't put people into a situation that is going to end badly. Because remember, the banks were saying, I'll just sell the home if I have to, because it always rises in value, and I'll cover my own liability. But on the other hand, what about the client? Right? Well, the client was going to get devastated, was going to get destroyed, was going to get thrown out of their home. And it really was a crisis of ethics in many respects. It was really a crisis of confidence in many respects. And I look back and think about the leaders who basically said, we're going to do what's right for us, and we really don't care what's right for the borrower. That was just so wrong.
Yeah, I do know what you're talking about because here in Australia, they were called no doc, low doc loans.
Yep.
No doc, low doc.
Yep.
And had to agree on that. So great insight there. Peter, I want to give you some time before we finish the show by sharing a little bit about Charcot-Marie tooth disease. Did you want to share a little bit? Because there may be someone who is in a similar situation as you. So what's encouraging words, anything that you would like to share around that?
Sure thing. Thanks for the opportunity. So Charcot-Marie tooth disease is named after the three doctors that actually founded it or described it back in the 1800s. Dr. Charcot was essentially the first neurologist in the world. He's a French physician. And what they described was a progressively degenerative neurological disorder that was genetic in its origins and really had the characteristics of muscle weakness, muscle wasting, nerve signals really being interrupted to the distal parts of the body, mostly the hands and the feet, which is where it starts. And folks who have this disease the implications can range from a moderate case, like I would say I have a moderate case with a lot of weakness and a lot of hand issues and leg issues, etc., to very serious, where some people are in wheelchairs right from the beginning of their life. My sister, sadly, has been in a wheelchair for about 25 years at this juncture from her case of CMT. So it is a really very debilitating disease. There are about 3 million cases around the world, but we know that is way underdiagnosed, in essence, because in the Western world, it's probably reasonably well diagnosed, but even there, quite honestly, most doctors don't know what they're looking at. And unless you're a trained neurologist, you really don't know what you're looking at. But I fear that in other parts of the world where the healthcare is not quite as sophisticated, it just goes undiagnosed entirely. So the estimate of 3 million, in my view, is probably half of what is out there. Excuse me. So I am leading a campaign to raise some money, trying to raise $10 million right now to fund research to see if we can get after what's called CMT, and if we can find some treatments and cures. Presently, there are no treatments and there are no cures for the disease, and we are seeking funds so that we can fund treatment. We've raised about $6 million over the last year and a half against that $10 million goal. And we're going to keep going until we solve this riddle.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. And Peter, if people are listening, how can they get in contact with you to find out more about your work, more about your book, and more about this wonderful campaign that you're to raise funds for CMT, more studies into that? How can they reach out to you?
So the best way probably is just go to my website. It's peterjdesilva.com. You'll find all the information about my book out there, and you can certainly get the book on Amazon and Apple Books and pretty much anywhere today it's available. On that website, you can learn a little bit more about CMT as well. But if you're particularly interested in that, go to cmtrf.org. That's the organization that we've created to fund this research and such. So cmtrf.org for that, or come to my website and you can actually link over there.
Yeah, fantastic. Peter, one of the things that I do at the end of each show is just finish with a word of prayer. May I do that for you today? Fantastic. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for the opportunity that we could speak with Peter today and to hear the wonderful lessons that he's learned and those insights that we can also consider what's and how we run our businesses. And of course, as Peter said, we can also apply these to our personal life. Father, we just want to pray and for an ongoing blessing for the work that he's doing. Particularly with the special campaign and the project with CMT. Father, we just bring that and commit that to prayer as well. Father, if anyone is listening and or watching this recording, maybe even too, that they will be blessed from what Peter has shared today. And of course, we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much, Peter, for coming on the show. It's been a little bit longer than the normal show that we do, but wanted to honour you for the wonderful lessons that I know others will certainly take from your discussion today. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and maybe we'll see you again.
Hey, it's Anne-Marie. Before I go, are you a coach or a consultant who feels like the world's best kept secret? Your experience is vast, yet secretly you're frustrated because despite all of your hard work, you're just not getting the visibility, the recognition, or new clients you'd hope for, and you don't know why? I've created a free resource that'll help you build visibility, generate leads, and enroll dream clients with ease because you're seen as a trusted authority, even in a crowded marketplace. And you've positioned yourself as the choice versus just a choice for your dream client. To get started, go to annemariecross.com/gift. That's annemariecross.com/gift.